Welcome to the first lecture on the Great Gatsby. In this lecture, I want to cover two things. First of all, I want to talk briefly about the shift from American realism to American modernism. And second of all, I want to talk about the Great Gatsby as a work of American modernist fiction. I'm going to throw a couple of ideas up on the board, things that we've talked about, as a way of starting the discussion about what modernism is and how it is a reaction to previous modes of American aesthetics. The Romantics tended to populate their fiction with unusually willful individuals, characters with peculiar ambitions, and also non-centrist plots. For example, in Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, Montresor, the narrator, is trying to kill Fortunato, his townsman. I'd say that's a fairly good example of the type of characters and plots that you tend to find in romantic fiction. The realists, in turn, they have an antagonistic aesthetic. They would like to push aside the romantic aesthetic and replace it with the dominant form of realism. The concept of realism, boiled down as a review, is this. Well, by the time we get up to the second half of the 19th century, there is enough writers and editors and readers in the country, and people reading American fiction outside of America, so that there's the idea that American literature can be a way of preserving and documenting authentic American life. And so the realist would like to have regional American settings that represent true American life. They would like to have centrist characters, that is, common average characters. In Huck Finn, you have a pretty good representation of the social strata of St. Petersburg in that book. You have a couple people who seem to be wealthy, such as the judge. You have a number of middle-class characters, such as the widow Douglas, and then you have a few characters that are flat-out poor, such as Huck and his father. Realism would also like to put forward straightforward, authentic plots. They want to have stories cobbled together out of the actual material of average American life. And so Huck Finn, at its core, is the story of a young boy who is beginning a voyage towards manhood, looking around his corrupt culture and trying to find a place for himself there as an adult. This is a very common plot, the type of plot that most people go through at some point in their life. Well, the thrust of the argument as realism as the better of the two aesthetics is mainly this, that realism is more authentic, that it's better representative, and it is a way to document objective life in America. By the time we get up to the 20th century, there's two large problems for the realists. The first is more substantial than the second one. The first problem is this. People start to see human life as more complex than they did in the 19th century. Well, first of all, Darwin comes along and puts forward the theory that man is not a unique creature, but just a more complex animal. Quantum theory puts forward the idea that the universe is more complex than originally believed. But most significantly, Sigmund Freud says that humans are not in charge of their own desires. They don't understand their own actions, and that each person is a unique individual who perceives the world in a unique fashion based on his or her experiences. That is, the past is the filter through which the present is understood. And so, well, if this class took place 150 years ago, and I were to ask, Johnny, do you see the same world as Tim? And Johnny would say, well, of course I do. We all see the world the same way, because the objective world was believed to be knowable. And if you didn't see the world the same way as Johnny or Timmy, you would be crazy. By the time we get up to the early part of the 20th century, that idea is pushed aside, primarily because of Freud. We can't see the objective world anymore. It exists out there, There is an objective world. It's filled with, chairs and tables and buildings and trees. It's there. The objective world has people. The objective world has relationships between people. The problem here is, in terms of realist literature, we can't know it. We can no longer know the objective world. And so at its core, realism was trying to present in literature, through language, a mimetic, a photographic representation of reality. It was trying to encode into language the components of objective reality. By the time we get up to the beginnings of the 20th century, we no longer believe that that's a possibility. We can't know objective reality. All we are capable of understanding is our unique, subjective understanding of what's happening out there in the world. And so, today, if I were to ask, Johnny, do you see the world the same way as Tim? Johnny would say, of course not. I see the world, perceive the world, I understand the world based on the things that I've learned, my unique belief system, a series of past experiences. That's how I create meaning of the world around me. That's how I choose to focus on this thing as opposed to that thing over there. And so though there are unlimited stimuli out there in the world, the things that we focus on and how we interpret them is based on those things that have already happened to us. And so by the time we get up to the 20th century, the fundamental ambitions of realist fiction are no longer possible. Fiction can no longer capture the objective world because people can't see the objective world. And so we have an interesting thing happen by the time we get up to the 20th century. We've had two strong, lengthy American aesthetics of fiction. Both of them have failed. The Romantics have fallen out of favor. The Realists have fallen out of favor, well, primarily because the concept behind realistic fiction is no longer believed valid. The Realists have another problem. If this is a representation of circles of human strata and so on, and here's the average man, and out here towards the border of civilization are unique people. Well, realism has favored people at the center. The second problem for realism is this. It doesn't cover really all of American life. It privileges those people closest to the center. And beyond that, there's a practical problem. The plots that you find there at the center, they're interesting once or twice, but the plot of maturity, of growing up like Huck Finn, after you've seen it over and over again, loses some of its appeal. In the short story by Mary Wilkins Freeman, The Revolt of Mother, the plot revolves around a man and his wife arguing over how to spend limited household funds. And these types of plots limit the drama. And so what we start to see at the beginning of the 20th century is we see, I'll erase this here, we see the return of some aspects of romantic fiction. In the book The Great Gatsby, we have a romantic character. We have Jay Gatsby. And when I talk about Jay Gatsby as being a romantic character, I don't mean that he's in love with Daisy. That's not what I mean by romantic. I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about that Jay Gatsby exists at the fringe of human existence. He is a bootlegger. He has amassed incredible wealth very quickly. He is a social liar. He is a person who believes that he can, through the accumulation of wealth and hopefully the elevation of status, go back and recapture the love of his youth. Well, this person sounds much more like that uniquely willed person that we would have seen in a story by Edgar Allan Poe than in someone that has an average American experience, such as in Huck Finn. And so we do see some of these characters coming back. We also see elements of realism in play. There's a lot of straightforward mimetic details in The Great Gatsby. And so we see some components of realism coming back into play. Another one we see is that this book trusts the reader to interpret dialogue, and gesture in the way that was very familiar to realist fiction. And we see one thing that we haven't seen before. Modern fiction is going to try to add something new, is going to cobble together some aspects of the Romantic tradition, some aspects of the realist tradition, and add some things to it. By the time we get up to Fitzgerald's life, his publishing life, let's say in the 1920s, there has been a century of American fiction. When we started out this course and we were talking about people like Hawthorne or Washington Irving, they didn't have strong mentor figures in American literature. American fiction was new. They were still figuring out ways to distribute it. And so the concept of producing an American short story or an American novel was a new concept. By the time we get up to the 1920s, well, Fitzgerald has a whole century of mentor figures to rely upon. He can go through hundreds of books trying to understand what components of the American canon can be useful in creating a new type of work. This new type of work, let's say, has two strong trends. I'm going to bring in a book that's not specifically on our syllabus by William Faulkner called The Salmon Fury. One of these trends is going to say, well, if language can't observe the objective world, this is the problem here. Language is no longer believed possible to hold the objective world. Well, what can language authentically hold? People such as James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner are going to put forward this idea. Language is not that which that holds the objective world. Language holds the subjective world. And so for these authors in some of their books, the way that they present this newness in literature is through a stream of consciousness. People, think in images, people think in sounds. People in large part, I think with words. And so what Faulkner does is he tries to use narration to approximate the thought processes of his characters. And so for Faulkner, in The Salmon Fury, let's say this is Benji here. The point of narration is going to be deeply inside of Benji's mind. The narration is not going to describe the outside world directly. It's only going to talk about how Benji's minds work, his perceptions, his memories at the moment. The language is going to give us a stream of fluid thought that approximates how Benji Compson thinks during the scene. The book has 4 sections. Each of them focuses on one of 4 members of the Compson household. The first one takes place on April 7th, 1928, and it focuses on Benji. This is his 33rd birthday. Benji has the thought capacities of a 5-year-old. He requires a caretaker. In the book, it refers to Benji as having a limited consciousness. And so our narration here is going to pull us down into this person that has the ability to think like a 5-year-old about that level of complexity. And it's going to make us perceive the world through this unique subjective consciousness. This is how it works. Benji doesn't understand what he sees. He can perceive images, but he can't always interpret them. He's out in a field with his caretaker, an African-American young man named Luster, and they are looking for a quarter. And that's where our narration starts off. I'm just here at the beginning of the book. Faulkner just throws us in, puts us in the cage of Benji Compson. His consciousness traps us in there for about 70 pages, and allows us to stumble and muscle our way to find meaning as Benji does in his own circumstance. I'll read you a page or so and you can get a feel for how this is the language of thought. If language can't capture the exterior world, Faulkner's concept is that language then can capture thought. Through the fence between the curling flower spaces, I could see them hitting. They were coming toward where the flag was, and I went along the fence. Lester was hunting in the grass by the flower tree. They took the flag out, and they were hitting. They put the flag back, and then went to the table, and he hit, and the other hit. Then they went on, and I went along the fence. Lester came away from the flower tree, and we went along the fence, and they stopped, and we stopped, and I looked through the fence while Lester was hunting in the grass. "Here, Caddy!" He hit. They went way across the pasture. I held the fence and watching them go away. "Listen at you now," Lester said. "Ain't you something, 33 years old going on that way, after I went all the way to town to buy you that cake. Hush up that moaning. Ain't you gonna help me find that quarter so I can go to the show tonight?" They were hitting little across the pasture. I went back along the fence to where the flag was. It flapped on the bright grass and trees. "Come on," Lester said. "We done looked there. They ain't no more coming right now. Let's go down to the branch and find the quarter before the niggers finds it." It was red flapping on the pasture. Then there was a bird slanting and tilting on it. Lester threw. The flag flapped on the bright grass and the trees. I held to the fence. "Shut up that moaning," Lester said. "I can't make them come if they ain't coming." Well, this scene, what's happening out there in the exterior world, is Benji, who is 33 years old today, is with Lester, and he is watching a group of men play golf. He doesn't understand the rules of golf. He doesn't even understand that is what it's called. And so we get descriptions as he would understand that. He can see a flag being pulled out, being put back into the sod. He can see a man hitting. He hit, the other hit, and so on. One of the men keeps calling for his caddy to get a different club. But what Benji hears, he doesn't know that that person is called a caddy. What he hears is "Here, caddy." And that's going to be the nickname of his sister. And so he hears "Here, caddy," this person that used to take care of him. Well, that's one approach to figure out how to make a novel authentic. Can't capture language out there, can't get to the exterior world, but language might be able to capture realistically how things work up here. Fitzgerald is not part of the stream of consciousness tradition. Fitzgerald and other people like him, such as Hemingway, are going to put forward a different aesthetic, a different modernist aesthetic in how language works in literature. And that aesthetic is this: language is subjective. Language can't capture reality, but language is the beautiful means by which one person's orientation or vision of the exterior world is presented on the page. If you think of Thomas Eakins as a type of American realist painter who is trying to capture with strong mimesis scenes of America, contemporary America. Well, just think of Mary Cassatt. She's also trying to capture images, contemporary images. But her images, just a little bit later than Eakins, are influenced by an early wave of this modernist concept. And this wave's informing her work so that, well, mimesis, this photographic representation, is no longer as important, but it is transformed by a singular vision into a new, subjective, beautiful image. And so for painters such as Cassatt, what matters then is how this real image, this image from the objective world, is transformed by one person into a painting. So things that are important, color selection, brush stroke, how paint is layered onto canvas, the components of the painting, the actual act of painting becomes important. And we see that same type of aesthetic going on in Fitzgerald's novels. Fitzgerald is a beautiful prose stylist. He has breathtaking descriptions. What he is doing here is he's taking this image of realistic New York, objective New York, and is transforming it into the Valley of Ashes, into East Egg and West Egg, into individual, achingly stunning lines of description. So the real world becomes something slightly different. It is transformed by the way that Nick Carraway describes it. in this novel. And so for Fitzgerald, the way that his novel becomes new is this transformative effect of the prose. For someone like Fitzgerald, the way the novel becomes new, a new presentation of reality, is that the prose becomes the approximation of thought language. Let me give you two other ways that the great Gatsby puts forward a new aesthetic, this aesthetic of modernism, how it includes that. The first of it is this. The great Gatsby, unlike Huck Finn, acknowledges this subjectivity. Huck Finn experiences 99% of that story. He has firsthand knowledge of most everything that's included in that book. And so that story is assembled from personal experience. Huck Finn owns the reality of that story in that book. He sees almost everything. In this book, Nick Carraway does not see almost everything. Nick Carraway works as an editor, compiling the experiences of other people, plus that of himself, into The Great Gatsby. And so for long sections, Nick Carraway relies on the information that Jordan Baker has to give us a background of Daisy and Jay Gatsby. Nick Carraway relies on the information that Gatsby has in those last few chapters to fill in information about his boyhood and information that concerns Gatsby and Dan Cody. Nick Carraway relies on information that Daisy has, as well as the things that he's seen himself. And so he doesn't own the story. He doesn't own that external experience. It is collected from many subjective sources. That's one of the ways that we start to see modernism at work in this book. And the other, I think, very obvious way that we see modernism at work in this book is that Huck Finn, well, when he introduces himself to us, he comes forward with this paragraph-long introduction in which he explains that there are problems with books. People like Mark Twain tell stretchers, whereas he, Huck, is going to offer the authentic version of life in St. Petersburg, Missouri, before everyone starts to move downstream. Well, Nick Carraway has a very different introduction in his book. The first few pages explain to us who Nick Carraway is. Nick Carraway has a good education. He comes from money. He's been told by his father to delay judgment on other people because he's had certain advantages. Well, why is this section here? Well, other than to tell us who the character is so that we understand how to interpret experience once it happens, Nick Carraway is expressing that idea of subjectivity or unreliability. He's saying, I'm going to tell you what I've seen and how I interpreted it, why it matters to me. I don't own objective reality out there. I've just seen these things, and this is why they're meaningful to me. This is my subjective filter. I come from privilege, I come from high education, I come from liberal parents. He is giving us these touchstones to let us know exactly how this filter of subjectivity is going to influence how he presents the story that is to follow. There are aspects of modern life in this book too. Modern aesthetics, by modern aesthetics I mean the construction of the book, how the book is constructed in terms of narrative style, prose style, in terms of plot organization. Well, those things would include subjectivity and how Fitzgerald uses the language with its transformative effect. There are also aspects of modern life in here. And so there is a lifestyle of modernism that goes on in this book. If you think of modernism existing roughly from 1910 through 1945, that is more or less encompassing the space between the two world wars. People will argue when modernism begins and when it ends, but those are, good rough dates. There are aspects of the unique lifestyle that exists in this book as well. You start to see that money, true wealth, large wealth is made not through the production of crops or the manufacture of goods or even the presentation of services. It's made through business deals. You start to see the new American woman like Jordan Baker, who could be successful on her own without a husband, without parents supervising her. You see Prohibition. You also see the large financial boom that follows World War I in America. And those are lifestyle aspects of the modernist life, and we'll talk about those a little bit as we move forward. But at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to transition and look at 3 sections from chapter 1 to set us up for this book. This is a terrific book that I think in high school is always taught as the exploration of the American dream. And we'll look at that. We'll look at that next time. But this is a soap opera. This book is about people having affairs. Tom Buchanan has affair after affair after affair. This book is about murder. This book is about being killed. This is a soap opera. This is a large, expansive story. This is that romantic plot in play. This is not a realist plot in play. This is a romantic plot with at least one romantic character, Jay Gatsby, and some realist characters thrown in. And so we're starting to see what can be accomplished in a book when you can pull at will from different traditions, recombine them, add some things to that to make an interesting statement about contemporary American life. I'm going to start with chapter 1. And before I read the section, I'll read 2 pages. I want to highlight 3 things that we're receiving here in this introductory passage. First of all, this is that subjective filter that I talked about. Nick Carraway comes out and says, well, here is my past, here's my belief system, and this is why I perceive the world in the way that I do. Second of all, he tells us that the story is based as a journey narrative. And a journey narrative involves a person leaving home, going to a foreign place, and then returning home, irrevocably changed. Nick Carraway gestures to that. He says that last year, when he returned home from this journey to New York, his value system was shaken. He had come back as a person that was exceptionally different than the person who originally left to go to New York. And the third thing that he throws out here is this. He says that there is this person that we are going to soon meet, whose name is Gatsby. And Nick Carraway looks down on people who are pretentious, people who are inauthentic, people who are liars, people who are plagiarists, that is, people who make up stories and details about their lives based on what they've read in books or stories that they've heard. And he suspects initially that Gatsby is one of these people, one of these plagiarist, wild young men. But he also senses something else, that there is something compassionate and gorgeous and sensitive in Gatsby that makes up for all of these things that Nick usually despises. Let me read you those first 2 pages. And notice how the language navigates between these 3 points as moving us into discussion in this book. In my younger, more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person. And so it came about in college that I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently I feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I'm still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat. A sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability, which is dignified under the name of the creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift of hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. Okay. The novel tells us up front, Nick Carraway believes in Gatsby, believes in what he was trying to accomplish. He is a romantic figure. He is a person that has an unusually expansive personality. He is a person of great sensitivity. And the problem is not in Gatsby as a person, as this larger-than-life individual. The problem is something in American culture, this belief system that preyed upon Gatsby that ultimately brought him down. I want to take a look at a larger section now. I'm moving a few pages forward. I'm on page 14. Our page numbers may not match. I'm about a third of the way into chapter 1. I'm starting with a line spoken by Tom Buchanan that says, "What are you doing, Nick?" Novels tend to have one of two common strategies for introducing the characters in the story. One of the strategies is to introduce the characters one by one, a new chapter, a new character, and so on until we understand who's who. The other strategy is to present them all as a group, and that's the strategy that we have here. And so in chapter 1, we meet 4 of the 5 primary characters. In this grouping, we have Tom Buchanan, Daisy Buchanan, Nick Carraway, and Jordan Baker. One of the traits that this novel absorbs from the realist tradition is that it expects a great deal of the reader. In the 1920s, you have a sophisticated readership in America, and so Fitzgerald is depending upon his initial readers to be able to interpret gesture and dialogue in such a way as to then deduce underlying character motivation. I've probably mentioned before that we now in America probably have a more sophisticated visual literacy, that we're very good at interpreting images and movies, and maybe we don't have the same strong mental capabilities when it comes to books as they did in 1920. And so I want to read a longer passage here, stopping in places to talk about what is being suggested by the dialogue and by the action that's happening on the page. "What are you doing, Nick?" "Well, I'm a bond man." "Who with?" I told him. "Never heard of him," he remarked decisively. This annoyed me. "You will," I answered shortly. "You will if you stay in the East." "Oh, I'll stay in the East. Don't you worry," he said, glancing at Daisy, and then back at me as if he were alert for something more. "I'd be a goddamn fool to live anywhere else." At this point, Miss Baker said, "Absolutely," with such suddenness that I started. It was the first word she had uttered since I came into the room. Evidently it surprised her as much as it did me, for she yawned and with a series of rapid, deft movements stood up into the room. "I'm stiff," she complained. "I've been lying on that sofa for as long as I can remember." "Don't look at me," Daisy retorted. "I've been trying to get you to go to New York all afternoon." "No thanks," said Miss Baker to the 4 cocktails just in from the pantry. "I'm absolutely in training." Her host looked at her incredulously. "You are?" He took down his drink as if it were a drop in the bottom of a glass. "How you ever get anything done is beyond me." I looked at Miss Baker, wondering what it was she got done. Well, let me just stop there for a second. Here is what's happened. Drinks have come in. A butler's offering them cocktails, alcoholic beverages, and Miss Baker refuses them. Tom tells us this is unusual. You are? He says that she usually drinks, but she's making a show of saying that she's in training. Well, what's going on here? Well, clearly what's going on here is that Miss Baker is trying to make an impression on Nick Carraway. They're being set up. Nick doesn't seem to be fully aware of this. George Baker seems to be fully aware of this. And so what she would like to do is she'd like to focus the attention on herself. She would like to get Nick to ask her what she does, what she's in training for. It's going to happen a little bit later. She feels that she's going to be in a stronger romantic position if Nick's attention gradually and naturally focuses on her without someone forcing it there. And so she's offering up these lures. I'm in training. I'm doing this. I can't drink right now because I'm doing important things. And so she's trying to open up the discussion that will focus some of the conversation over on her and focus Nick's attention over on her. I looked at Miss Baker. It's a little successful already. I looked at Miss Baker, wondering what it was she got done. I enjoyed looking at her. She was a slender, small-breasted girl with an erect carriage, which she accentuated by throwing her body backward at the shoulder, like a young cadet. Her gray sun-streaked eyes looked back at me with polite reciprocal curiosity out of a wan, charming, discontented face. It occurred to me now that I'd seen her, or a picture of her, somewhere before. "You live in West Egg," she remarked contemptuously. "I know somebody over there." "I don't know a single—" "Well, you must know Gatsby." "Gatsby?" demanded Daisy. "What Gatsby?" Well, that's an unusual line for Daisy to throw out there as well, too. And so we're about to find out that Daisy's in an unhappy marriage. And so the name Gatsby, which is made up by J. Gatz, is a unique name. And so when it comes out Gatsby, she's already listening for it. She's already attuned to the promise of what might be on the other side of that word, Gatsby. And so you start to see that plot already in play here in that first section. Before I could reply that he was my neighbor, dinner was announced. Wedging his terse arm imperatively under mine, Tom Buchanan compelled me from the room as though he were moving a checker to another square. Slenderly, languidly, their hands set on their hips, the two young women preceded us onto a rosy-colored porch open toward the sunset where 4 candles flickered on the table in the diminished wind. "Why candles?" objected Daisy, frowning. She snapped them out with her fingers. "In 2 weeks it'll be the longest day of the year." She looked at us radiantly. "Do you always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it?" "I always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it." "We had to plan something," yawned Miss Baker, sitting down at the table as if she were getting into bed. "All right," said Daisy. "What'll we plan?" She turned to me helplessly. "What do people plan?" Before I could answer, her eyes fastened in an odd fashion. Before I could answer, her eyes fastened with an odd expression on her little finger. "Look," she complained. I heard it. We all looked. The knuckle was black and blue. "You did it, Tom," she said accusingly. I know you didn't mean to, but you did do it. That's what I get for marrying a brute of a man, a great big hulking physical specimen of—" "I hate that word, hulking," objected Tom crossly. "Even in kidding, hulking," insisted Daisy. Let me stop there. We get 2 more pieces of information here. Well, first of all, we get Nick's impression of the lifestyle of Tom and Daisy. They are the bored, aimless rich. What do they do with their days? They plan parties that aren't going to happen. They go shopping. They sit around drinking drinks. They have received their money as family money. They don't produce anything creative or of meaning. They aren't part of commerce. They are part of this established wealthy class that exists, back home and also exists there in New York. And well, Nick is looking at them with a certain amount of disdain. Nick comes from money, but Nick feels that it's also his obligation to contribute in a meaningful way. So he's got a job at a bond business. He is trying to make some type of meaningful contribution with his life whereas Tom and Daisy aren't even doing that. And then comes this, look at my ring finger section. Look at my ring finger. What is Daisy doing there? She's trying to explain to Nick and Jordan that she's in an abusive marriage. Tom hits her. Tom beats her. This isn't the first time. She's had bruises before. Well, why is she doing this? Well, I think the usual reasons would be that she wants help. She wants someone to intercede. That's a possibility. It seems unlikely here. Or she wants sympathy. That seems more likely here. She would like Nick and Jordan, her old friends, to understand the extent of her unhappiness in this marriage with Tom. And here it is. Here's evidence of it. The hulking brute hit me. And you can see the bruise right here. Sometimes she and Miss Baker talked at once, unobtrusively and with bantering inconsequence that was never quite chatter. This was as cool as their white dresses and their impersonal eyes in the absence of all desire. They were here and they accepted Tom and me, making only a polite, pleasant effort to entertain or to be entertained. They knew presently dinner would be over, and a little later the evening too would be over and casually put away. It was sharply different from the West, where an evening was hurried from phase to phase towards its close in a continually disappointed anticipation, or else in sheer nervous dread of the moment itself. "You make me feel uncivilized, Daisy," I confessed on my second glass of corky but rather impressive claret. "Can't you talk about crops or something?" I meant nothing in particular by this remark, but it was taken up in an unexpected way. "Civilization's going to pieces," broke out Tom violently. "I've gotten to be a terrible pessimist about things. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by this man Godard?" "Why, no," I answered, rather surprised by his tone. "Well, it's a fine book, and everybody ought to read it. The idea is if we don't look out, the white race will be utterly submerged. It's all scientific stuff. It's been proved." "Tom's getting very profound," said Daisy, with an expression of unthoughtful sadness. "He reads deep books with long words in them. What was that word Okay. Here we're getting two things. We're getting two things at once. First of all, Tom is vying for attention. He would like to be seen as the man of importance at this dinner. He's used to that position, and so he's confused when that position is denied him. He's also telling us that he's interested in this racist dogma put forward by this author Godard that expresses the idea that the white race is privileged because of certain accomplishments of Europeans, basically. Well, what is Tom telling us? Tom is looking for a justification of why he has money and other people don't. He has family money. What did he do to get this money? Well, he didn't work. He didn't invent anything. He didn't work long years in a business. He was simply born into the right type of family that had money to give him. He never has to work. He has a string of ponies. He has multiple residences. And so this is his justification for why he has money. He's looking for, why am I, Tom Buchanan, lucky enough to have all this money? Well, Tom's justification is this. It's because of this racist propaganda. He deserves the money because he has a certain color skin and is therefore related to other people that have the same shade of skin as him. Does Daisy buy into this? No, not at all. Daisy makes fun of Tom. And this is one of the power battles that we're going to see over and over between the two of them in this book. Tom wants to be acknowledged as an important intellectual person in this dinner setting and in other social settings. Daisy's going to always take that away from him. Tom lashes out with physical violence. Daisy, who is much smarter, Daisy, who is much more nimble in social settings, tries to take that away over and over again. And this is how it works. He reads deep books with long words in them. What was that word and then there's that line that says she was cut off. But what's coming? Tom knows what's coming. What was that word that we had to look up in the dictionary, Tom? Economics. What was that big word we had to look up? It's going to be something that's insulting, that shows that Tom's a dim-witted dolt. And so he's cutting her off before Daisy can come through with that line. "Well, these books are all scientific," insisted Tom, glancing at her impatiently. This fellow has worked out the whole thing. It's up to us, who are the dominant race, to watch out for these other races, or these other races will have control of things. We got to beat them down, whispered Daisy, winking ferociously toward the fervent sun. You ought to live in California, began Miss Baker, but Tom interrupted her by shifting heavily in his chair. The idea is that we're Nordics. I am, and you are, and you are, and... After an infinitesimal hesitation, he included Daisy with a slight nod, and she winked at me again. And we've produced all the things that go to make civilization. Oh, science and art and all that. Do you see? There was something pathetic in his concentration, as if his complacency, more acute than of old, was not enough to him anymore. When almost immediately the telephone rang inside, the butler left the porch. Daisy seized upon the momentary interruption and leaned toward me. I'll tell you a family secret, she whispered enthusiastically. It's about the butler's nose. Do you want to hear about the butler's nose? Okay. Well, what is this pointless story being thrown out by Daisy? This is a story she's practiced. It has kind of a funny closing line. It's an odd departure from what they were talking about a minute ago. Nick doesn't know what's going on there in this room, but Daisy does. Daisy has a really good idea of why the phone's ringing right now. It's Tom's mistress calling. And so Daisy's going to try to distract Nick, try to, pull his attention away from what's going on inside, on the other side of those curtains, so that he doesn't realize that a scene is probably going on between Tom and his mistress Myrtle on the phone, and instead is going to throw out this kind of light conversation as a method of distracting him. I'll tell you a family secret, she whispered enthusiastically. It's about the butler's nose. Do you want to hear about the butler's nose? Why, that's why I came over tonight. Well, he wasn't always a butler. He used to be the silver polisher for some people in New York that had the silver service for 200. He had to polish it from morning till night until finally it began to affect his nose. Things went from bad to worse, suggested Miss Baker. Yes, things went from bad to worse until finally he had to give up his position. For a moment, the last sunshine fell with romantic affection upon her glowing face. Her voice compelled me forward breathlessly as I listened. Then the glow faded, each light deserting her with a lingering regret, like children leaving a pleasant street at dusk. The butler came back and murmured something close to Tom's ear, whereupon Tom frowned, pushed back his chair, and without a word went inside. As if his absence quickened something within her, Daisy leaned forward again, her voice glowing and singing, I love to see you at my table, Nick. This is more of that distracting small talk, so Nick doesn't notice this larger drama that's happening at the periphery of the evening. I love to see you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose, an absolute rose, doesn't he? She turned to Miss Baker for confirmation. An absolute rose. This was untrue. I was not even fainting like a rose. She was only extemporizing. But a stirring warmth flowed from her as if her heart was trying to come out to you, concealed in one of those breathless, thrilling words. Then suddenly she threw her napkin on the table and excused herself and went into the house. Miss Baker and I exchanged a short glance, consciously devoid of meaning. I was about to speak up when she sat up alertly and said, "Shh," in a warning voice. A subdued, impassioned murmur was audible in the room beyond, and Miss Baker leaned forward, unashamed, trying to hear. The murmur trembled on the verge of coherence, sank down, mounted excitedly, and then ceased altogether. "This Mr. Gatsby you spoke of is my neighbor," I said. "Don't talk. I want to hear what happens." "Is something happening?" I inquired innocently. "You mean to say you don't know?" said Miss Baker, honestly surprised. "I thought everybody knew." "I don't." "Why," she said hesitantly, "Tom's got some woman in New York." "Got some woman?" I repeated blankly. Miss Baker nodded. "She might have the decency not to phone him at dinner time, don't you think?" Almost before I grasped her meaning, there was the flutter of a dress and the crunch of leather boots, and Tom and Daisy were back at the table. "It couldn't be helped," cried Daisy with tense gaiety. She sat down, glanced searchingly at Miss Baker, then at me, and continued. And here's that look at Daisy. She wants to figure out how much has been revealed, how much Nick now knows of the drama that's happened inside. And so from here, our four people, they go outside, they have dinner, and then after that they split up. Daisy and Nick stay outside, and Tom and Jordan go inside and read from the Saturday Evening Post. One of the things to notice here that I think is kind of fascinating and really kind of amusing to watch is that Daisy's able to mimic Tom's gestures, his facial expressions, and his voice. And so Daisy can make fun of Tom while Tom's there. Daisy is that subtle that she's able to poke fun of Tom, and Tom never quite gets it. He's suspicious. He knows that Daisy is implying more than what she's saying, but she does it so subtly that Tom never quite catches on. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit to the point where the scene closes down and Nick is about to go home for the evening. I'm on page 22. Inside, the crimson room blossomed with light. Tom and Miss Baker sat at either end of the long couch, and she read to him out loud from the Saturday Evening Post. The words, murmurous and uninflected, running together in a soothing tone. The lamplight, bright on his boots and dull on the autumn leaf yellow of her hair, glinted along the paper as she turned a page with a flutter of slender muscles in her arms. When we came in, she held us silent for a moment with a lifted hand. She's just a second. I'm almost at the end of this article. To be continued, she said, tossing the magazine on the table, in our very next issue. Her body asserted itself with a restless movement of her knee, and she stood up. 10 o'clock, she remarked, apparently finding the time on the ceiling. Time for this good girl to go to bed. Jordan's going to play in the tournament tomorrow, explained Daisy, over at Westchester. Oh, you're Jordan Baker. I knew now why her face was familiar. Its pleasing, contemptuous expression had looked out at me from many rotograph pictures of the sporting life at Asheville and Hot Springs and Palm Beach. I had heard some story, too, a critical and pleasant story, but what it was, I had forgotten long ago. Well, this has worked well for Jordan. Jordan has hinted at who she is. And Nick figures it out for himself. He remembers that he's seen her in the newspaper. And because he remembers it by himself, the impression has more force, which is exactly what she wants. And so she's cast a bit as a celebrity. Nick's interested in her. So she's been successful in manipulating the night so that finally attention is cast very favorably on her. Good night, she said softly. Wake me at 8, won't you? If you'll get up. And there we hear that same struggle for power. She's presenting herself as someone who's very interested in training and having this healthy lifestyle. And Tom keeps pointing out, it's like, well, why aren't you drinking? You get up at 8, you never get up at 8. If you'll get up is the line. And so he's pointing out that this image that she's pushing out there for Nick to see is not genuine. I will. Good night, Mr. Carraway. See you anon. Of course you will, confirmed Daisy. In fact, I think I'll arrange a marriage. Come over often, Nick, and I'll sort of, fling you together. Lock you up accidentally in linen closets and push you out to sea in a boat. All that sort of thing. Good night, called Miss Baker from the stairs. I haven't heard a word. She's a nice girl, said Tom after a moment. They oughtn't let her run around the country this way. Who oughtn't to? Inquired Daisy coldly. Her family. Her family is one aunt about 1,000 years old. Besides, Nick's going to look after you, aren't you, Nick? She's going to spend lots of weekends out here this summer. I think of the home influence will be good for her. Daisy and Tom looked at each other for a moment in silence. And here in this passage we see the suggestion of that modernist lifestyle, not the aesthetics, but the lifestyle of the 1920s. We see that new woman, we see Jordan Baker living on her own, having success under her own power. Daisy and Tom looked at each other for a moment in silence. Is she from New York, I asked quickly. From Louisville. Our white girlhood was passed together there. Our beautiful white, and here Daisy again is aping Tom. These are Tom's ideas brought back with mockery. From Louisville. Our white girlhood was passed together there. Our beautiful white. Did you give Nick a little heart-to-heart out on the veranda, demanded Tom suddenly. Did I? She looked at me. I can't seem to remember, but I think we talked about the Nordic race. Yes, I'm sure we did. It sort of crept up on us, and the first thing you know, don't believe everything you hear, Nick, he advised to me. Okay. That's the end of that passage, in which we meet our principal characters, 4 of the 5 principal characters for this book. We see that Nick really does take a long time to form judgments about people. That is true. We see that Jordan Baker is trying to manipulate the situation to her romantic advantage with Nick. We see that Daisy's desperately unhappy, that Tom, even in this initial scene, is implicated in multiple affairs. And we see that Tom is bored and aimless. He does not do anything productive. He has a string of polo ponies that he's not very interested in. He doesn't have any business that he calls his own. He is used to people deferring to him mainly because he has money. And when that doesn't happen, he reacts with violence. We're going to see, more violence from Tom. When we get to another party, and there's people that are at a lower social strata than Daisy, Tom is going to respond with violence while Nick's around and start and hit people because they don't defer to him properly. And so these suggestions are already in here. This is a world brimming with unhappiness, with affairs and violence just under the surface. And Nick's feeling those sensations as they bubble up into some of the dialogue. The last section that I'd like to take a look at is just the last paragraph of chapter 1. Nick doesn't know any of these things yet, but in retrospect, from our place in the book, we can tell much more about what's going on here than what Nick knows in the moment. And it's when he walks up that same night and he sees his neighbor, Jay Gatsby, on the lawn looking out at the water. Nick misinterprets it. He thinks he's looking at a green light. That's not it at all. He's looking at something far more specific, but Nick won't figure that out for a few more chapters. I decided to call to him. He sees Gatsby out there and he's looking for a reason to go over to introduce himself. And he figures that, they have a mutual friend, Miss Baker, and that's going to be good enough to start a conversation. I decided to call to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way. And far as I was from him, I could have sworn that he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. So here's the introduction for Gatsby. He's come out on this. He's come out on his lawn. He looks across the water at apparently this green light. But we know from our place in the book that that is not at all what's really happening here. The sound, this body of water, here's Nick's house here, and here's Gatsby's mansion. And here's the body of water. And across the body of water, there's a dock that has a green light on it. And next to that light, well, whose house is this? It's Daisy's house. Gatsby's come out on his lawn and he's looked across the water at Daisy's house. He's probably trying to see Daisy, see through one of the windows, look out there on the dock and see if maybe Daisy's come out for an evening stroll. Nick misinterprets this, and this is part of his early unreliability. He doesn't know the objective world. That's unknowable for him. He can't see into Gatsby's motivation, and so he interprets it the best way he can. He thinks that he's looking at this strange green light out there. What Gatsby's actually doing is he's looking for Daisy. He has made money, a great deal of money. He was once in love with Daisy when he was poor, and in the intervening years he got into some illegal activities that were very lucrative for him. Now he's got a stack of cash. He has bought this house specifically because it is so close to Daisy's house. He has a plan just like Jordan had a plan. Jordan's plan was that Nick was going to recognize her celebrity, before it was, put out there by someone like Tom or by her herself. Well, Gatsby has the exact same plan. He's bought this house, and on weekends he has parties out here on his back lawn. He has boats that slice through the sound with water skiers. He has a diving board, and so his parties extend out into the water every weekend. And his plan is this. He wants Daisy to come out some night and see these parties, and to be interested, and to come over, by car or by boat, and to visit these parties. And while at one of these parties, what is supposed to happen, same thing that Jordan wanted, what is supposed to happen is that Daisy's going to run into Gatsby. And she's going to put it together in her head on her own. And that same force of original thought is going to be in play. That Daisy's supposed to come to one of these parties and realize, wait, here's Jay Gatsby. Here's the man that I dumped because he wasn't rich, because he was poor, he was just a soldier, and I didn't think he could provide for me in the way that I'd grown up expecting. So she's supposed to come there and realize, well, here's someone that has spent the last 5 years developing himself so he could be of the right social standing and the right financial standing to merit Daisy, to earn her love. And Daisy over here, we already know she's unhappy. She's with Tom, who's dim, who has strange racist things to say, who's not very amusing in conversation, who's way beneath Daisy in terms of being able to create an entertaining or amusing conversation. She's stuck with that. She's stuck with someone who beats her. Well, over here, someone now who she dumped years ago, who spent the last 5 years single-mindedly trying to remake himself so that he could have Daisy. So this is our romantic figure over here, this remade man. And you can see the components of the plot in place. This is the trap that's being set for Daisy. She's going to come over and re-meet Jay Gatsby, but he is the transformed Gatsby. The Gatsby of money and hopefully of social standing, and she is supposed to fall in love with him as though this marriage never happened. I'm going to leave it there, and when we pick this up next time in class, I want to talk about how this book is going to be a critique of the American dream and of the idea that people in America can grow up to be whatever they want to be, and that there are few barriers that prevent people from rising in social strata. Talk to you soon.